Right, we now come to the statement. I call the Home Secretary, James Cleverly.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. With permission, I would like to make a statement to the House regarding measures that His Majesty Government will take in response to the reckless and dangerous activities of the Russian government across Europe and now suspected here in the UK. As reported on Friday the 26th of April, 5 individuals have been charged in connection with an investigation into alleged offences under the National Security Act as part of a counter-terrorism policing investigation. The offences relate to what was widely reported by the media as a suspected arson attack on a Ukraine-linked business in the UK. The Crown Prosecution Service has confirmed that the charges relate to alleged hostile activity in the UK in order to benefit a foreign state, namely Russia. I pay tribute to our law enforcement agencies for their quick and professional work to ensure that these charges were brought. The first charges to be brought under the new National Security Act. Measures which this government brought forward and which this House passed are already being used to keep our country safe. I also want to thank the emergency services who responded to the fire at the commercial property in London where the suspected activity took place. The charges here are serious, and it's only through good fortune that nobody was hurt. I want to reassure the House that public safety is of the utmost importance, which is why the law enforcement response has been quick and decisive. As members will appreciate, I must not say anything further on the specific case or any related case to avoid prejudicing the outcome of ongoing criminal proceedings. And I ask the House to respect this and to avoid using the debate to add to the speculation about this incident. It is vital that justice runs its course. However, I want to highlight to the House a pattern of suspected Russian activity that we are seeing across Europe. And of course, this is not the first time that we have uncovered malign activity seemingly linked to Russia in the UK in the past year. In September, 5 Bulgarian nationals were charged with conspiring to commit espionage activities in the UK on behalf of Russia. A 6th individual was later charged, and legal proceedings against all 6 are ongoing. There is a much broader pattern of Russian malign activity across Europe. These include plans for sabotage activities against military aid for Ukraine, in Germany and in Poland, espionage in Bulgaria and in Italy, cyber attacks and disinformation activities, airspace violations and GPS jamming with an impact on civil aviation. Over a number of years, we have witnessed Russia and its intelligence services engage in yet more open and more brazen attempts to undermine our security, harm our people, and interfere in our democracies. Litvinenko, Georgia, Crimea, Salisbury, Ukraine, and across Europe. And since the illegal invasion of Ukraine, the rhetoric, the threats, the accusations from Russia have only increased, as Putin seeks to justify the death and destruction that he has brought to the Ukrainian people. These activities bear all the hallmarks of a deliberate campaign by Russia designed to bring the war home across Europe and to undermine our collective resolve to support Ukraine in its fight. It will not work. As the Prime Minister said in Poland last month, we are at a turning point for European security. With our allies, we will stand firm in the face of Russian threats to the UK and to our way of life. It is why, after Salisbury, we took measures with our partners to make Europe a harder operating environment for Russian intelligence services, including the expulsion of 23 undeclared Russian intelligence officers from the UK. And it's why the UK has announced the biggest strengthening of the UK national defence in a generation, with a fully funded plan to grow the defence budget to 2.5% of GDP by 2030. And the UK and our allies will not falter in our support to Ukraine, because it is existential to the security of Europe. This is why the Prime Minister has also announced an uplift to military aid to Ukraine, bringing it to £3 billion this year, and has committed to this level of support every year until the end of the decade, or indeed longer if it is sadly still required. And we have sanctioned over 1,700 individuals, over 90% of the Russian banking sector, and over 130 oligarchs and family members with a combined net worth of £147 billion at the time of the invasion. And as of October, over £22 billion of Russian assets were reported frozen as a result of UK sanctions. These assets can no longer be taken back to Russia to fund Putin's war machine. We consider Russia's campaign to undermine our support to Ukraine unacceptable, and it is destined to fail. We must wait, of course, for the ongoing criminal cases across Europe, including here in the UK, to conclude. But given these allegations, the government will not wait to take further action to send a strong deterrence message to Russia and to further reduce its ability of the Russian intelligence services to threaten the UK. That is why today, Mr. Speaker, in conjunction with my right honourable friend, the Foreign Secretary, I am announcing a package of measures to make clear to Russia that we will not tolerate such apparent escalations. So I can tell the House that we will expel the Russian defence attaché, who is an undeclared military intelligence officer. We will remove diplomatic premises status from several Russian-owned properties in the UK, including Seacock's House, a Russian-owned property in Sussex, and the Trade and Defence section in Highgate, which we believe have been used for intelligence purposes. And we are imposing new restrictions on Russian diplomatic visas, including capping the length of time Russian diplomats can spend in the UK. The measures we and our international partners have taken in recent years have already made the UK an extremely challenging operating environment for Russian intelligence services. These further measures that I have described will only serve to strengthen our resilience to the Russian threat. Our NATO allies share our view of Russia's alleged behaviour, as seen in the North Atlantic Council's statement of last week. Russia has failed to provide any explanation for these events. In the coming days, we should expect accusations of Russophobia, conspiracy theories and hysteria from the Russian government. This is not new, and the British people and the British government will not fall for it and will not be taken for fools by Putin's bots, trolls and lackeys. Russia's explanation was totally inadequate. Our response will be resolute and firm. Our message to Russia is clear. Stop this illegal war. Withdraw your troops from Ukraine. Cease this malign activity. Mr. Speaker, I commend this statement to the House.
As the Secretary of State himself noted, he referred to a live case at the beginning of his statement. This case is sub judice, and I ask other members not to refer to it in their questions. Shadow Home Secretary Yvette.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and can I thank the Home Secretary for advance sight of the statement. It is the first job of any government to keep our country safe from those who wish to do us harm, not least those who wish to undermine our democracy and everything we stand for. And we pay tribute to the remarkable work of our intelligence and security services, our law enforcement agencies at home and abroad, who strain every sinew to keep us safe. And we will always work with the government on those national security issues. The arson attack the Home Secretary describes was a very serious one. The charges now laid are important. We support the work of law enforcement in this case, and it's immensely important nothing is done to cut across that criminal justice case now. So I simply ask for the Home Secretary's reassurance that a wider investigation is underway, not just into these specific offences, but into the wider context and any wider threats to our national security that might be linked to this incident. The Home Secretary has been clear in linking these charges to Russia, and we echo the Home Secretary's strong condemnation of Russian interference and hostile activity here in the UK and throughout Europe. Repeatedly, we have seen a brazen disregard by Russia for the rule of law, for the UK, for our allies, for our domestic security. And as my right honourable friends, the shadow Foreign and Defence Secretaries, have made clear, we stand shoulder to shoulder with the government in our support for Ukraine. Any change in government will not change that strong cross-party support as we stand with our allies. Putin must be defeated in Ukraine, and Britain must stand full square behind our Ukrainian friends. Russia under Putin is a long-term, generational threat to the security of Europe, which requires a long-term response. And as my right honourable friend, the Shadow Defence Secretary, said just yesterday, the defence of the UK starts in Ukraine. But as the Home Secretary has made clear, these challenges are also to our homeland security, and that is why we support wholeheartedly the measures the Home Secretary has set out today, just as we worked on a cross-party basis with the government to pass the National Security Act, and we will work closely with them in going further. But can I ask him a few further questions about these measures and about what further measures the government may be able to take? And ask him whether he expects there to be a diplomatic response from Russia. Can I ask him also, we saw obviously to such appalling extent in Salisbury very many years ago, the willingness of Russian-sponsored actors to put the safety of British citizens and British residents at risk. See the cyber threats, the threats to undermine our democracy and our economy. But I am concerned that we have known about the scale of these threats for some time, and in areas we have been too slow to respond. He has been too slow to rid the UK of illicit finance. He will know that concerns have been raised about prohibited imports of Russia-origin oil through third countries making their way to UK shores. Can he tell me what action is being taken to ensure that those sanctions are being enforced? He will know that there is real concern still that the UK is still too easy for lawyers, accountants and for the laundering of Russian money through the UK that potentially aids and abets Putin's war. The US has seized huge amounts of Russian-related assets as part of the sanctions evasion and charged over 70 individuals with sanctions evasion. Can he confirm that no one has yet been charged with sanctions evasion in the US? Can he set out what is being done to address sanctions evasion? The government has said in principle it supports the seizing of Russian assets to fund Ukraine reconstruction, but there have been no proposals to take that forward. Can he tell us what is happening there? We have also still not had a full account of the scale of risks from golden visas. And he will know too that there are threats to our democracy. The work of the Defending Democracy Task Force, I would say to him, I believe is far too limited. And whilst the Security Minister is working on this, can I ask him what engagement he as Home Secretary has had and whether this has been discussed at the National Security Council too? And finally, the update to the government's integrated review warned in March last year that the transition into a multipolar, fragmented and contested world has happened more quickly and definitively than anticipated. And it refers to the Iranian-sponsored kidnap and kill threats on UK soil, the repression of Hong Kong protesters outside of the Chinese consulate in Manchester. The UK has undergone, not just because of the behaviour from Russia, but more widely, a fundamental shift in the threat landscape as increasingly aggressive state actors feel emboldened to target the UK, often doing so in cooperation with serious unorganised crime. So can I urge him to look at the work that was done after the huge shift in the terror threat that we faced after 9/11 and after 7/7 to draw up the contest strategy. We do not have a similar contest strategy for state actors and state-sponsored threats. The work is far too fragmented. We in the Labour Party would like to see a comprehensive contest equivalent. Can I urge him to look again at that, and we will work with him on that too.
Home Secretary, 1 minute only.
Mr. Speaker, I thank the Right Honourable Lady for the various points that she made in her question about her party's commitment to the ongoing support for Ukraine in its self-defence. She was right to read it into the record. There is no doubt about her commitment from this side of the House. She asked a number of she sought my reassurance that we do look at the wider threats emanating from Russia. I can reassure her that we do. Of course, we liaise closely with our international partners, those other countries in the coalition of support to Ukraine, which we suspect are being targeted by Russia, and indeed the countries will take their discrete domestic actions. But I draw the attention to the point I made about the shared commitment as set out in the North Atlantic Council statement. I don't have the precise quote in front of me, but from memory it said nations will take both individual and collective action. So our response is calibrated. It is designed to send a very, very clear message, as well as hampering Russia's ability to conduct espionage here in the UK. But it is calibrated. Of course, we will look closely to see what response Russia puts forward, to see whether they seek to escalate this. But we will always make sure that we protect our ability to have lines of communication with Russia, even during these most challenging of times, routes for de-escalation, of error avoidance, and the avoidance of miscalculations are really important. We recognise that. I believe Putin's regime in Moscow recognise that, so we will seek to maintain lines of communication even whilst we take these decisive actions. With regard to sanctions, of course, we have put an extensive, we moved quickly, we moved in concert with our international friends and allies, and those sanctions are having an effect. Of course, Russia seeks to evade sanctions where we can, and whilst that is primarily the response of the HM Treasury in terms of sanctions enforcement, it is, of course, a cross-government piece of work, and all parts of government, and this was very much the case when I was Foreign Secretary, speaking with our international counterparts and interlocutors to try and close off those opportunities for sanctions evasion. We will, she mentions about the Defending Democracy task force. This is incredibly important, particularly as we head towards a general election. We will, of course, adapt. We will seek to work cross-party because it's in all our interests that we defend democracy, and I will continue to ensure both the Security Minister and I work closely with the Shadow Front Bench and other opposition parties' front bench teams to protect something that is so incredibly valuable.
Manchester.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I very much welcome the statement and the update by the Secretary of State. The United Kingdom has led the world in supporting Ukraine militarily, economically and diplomatically. Our key ally, the United States, has introduced legislation, and it was put forward by Congressman French Hill, my counterpart in the British-American Parliamentary Group, on the seizing Russian assets and using those assets to rebuild Ukraine, reconstruction of Ukraine. I have put forward a similar bill in Parliament, which is due for a second reading on the 17th of May, and I've written to the Foreign Secretary on that. Can the Home Secretary clarify if the United Kingdom will support those measures that the United States has, because it's absolutely crucial we do everything we can to cut off Putin's finances and make sure that he pays for the reconstruction of Ukraine?
Home Secretary.
Mr. Speaker, of course, we work very closely with our international allies with regard to putting pressure on the Russian regime. We will look closely at the detail of the proposals that are going through the United States system. Of course, there is a very big difference between the freezing of assets, the seizing of assets, in order to go from one to the other would need close international cooperation, coordination, and to make sure that we always act within the rule of law. We do not want to inadvertently find ourselves at the receiving end of criticism from a regime such as Putin's, that we are stepping outside the bounds of international law. But we have absolutely made it clear. We will be incredibly imaginative. We will work hard to ensure that the regime and the people that have funded the brutal attack on Ukraine are also those that fund the rebuilding of Ukraine, and we work with our international partners to make sure that's a reality.
We come to SNP spokesperson Stuart and McDonald.
Mr Speaker, can I thank the Home Secretary for advance sight of his statement and, like him, pay tribute to those in law enforcement who work so diligently to counter these types of threats. Of course, these types of threats are extremely well known and understood right across Europe. Disinformation, other types of hybrid threats are now a feature of democratic life in this country and elsewhere. And I think what that needs, Mr Speaker, is a comprehensive sea change in how we approach that threat, a new whole-of-society approach to dealing with hybrid threats. I'm fine to support the government's increase in defence spending, but really what we need is new thinking, new doctrines, new institutions in order to compete against threats that are ever-evolving, becoming more sophisticated, more aggressive, and also extremely well-funded. I want to focus in particular on the threat on disinformation, especially because we're in an election year. It used to be the case that the government would provide Parliament, I can't quite recall when this stopped, with a 6-monthly update on the threat posed by Daesh. Can we have a similar type of statement on hostile disinformation? A written statement to Parliament on a regular basis, informing members of where that threat is and what's being done to meet it. Can I echo the comments that have been made about pressing the government to ensure sanctioned money is converted into Ukrainian hryvnia to allow that country to rebuild? I won't press the Minister on that any further. He knows our views on it. But I would also point out, whilst I welcome the seizure of the assets he mentions in his statement and the expulsion of the defence attaché, there are tons of assets in Scotland, I can tell him, land, estates and much else, that could also be seized. And if he chooses to look into that any further, he will certainly have our support.
Yeah. Thank you, Mr Speaker. I think it's very important we are precise in our use of language. The Russian assets have been sanctioned. They have been frozen, and there is a very important legal difference between freezing and seizing. And it's important. No one has, as far as I'm aware, no one has seized or liquidated Russian assets. But of course, we abide by our commitment to make sure that the people that funded the brutality fund the reconstruction, and we are absolutely committed to that. I've taken a note of the point he made about regular updates, particularly as disinformation and distortions of our democracy and society have a more direct and immediate effect in the UK than perhaps the activities of Daesh. So I will take on board the practicalities of how much detail we might be able to put in the public domain. But we have, the government has set aside significant amounts of money to the Defending Democracy Task Force and the work streams that flow out from that to help parliamentarians and candidates at the forthcoming election defend themselves both physically and digitally against assaults that might come from them. And we are constantly looking at ways to make sure that is effective as possible. And with regard to the the points he made about international cooperation, of course we will continue to work very, very closely with our allies, because our self-defence has got to be collective if it's going to be fully effective.
Mr Bryant.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I wholeheartedly support every word that the Home Secretary has said today. He is absolutely right. Putin has been engaged now for at least 10 years, arguably longer, in a sustained, hostile and malign set of actions against the UK and our allies. And on occasions when we have not been as overt in our opposition, I think he's taken advantage of that. So I'm glad that the Home Secretary has taken this action today. He knows all the things I'm going to ask him about. Why is there still Russian oil coming into the UK? Why is Russia still exporting the same amount of oil as it did before sanctions were introduced? Why have we still not gone as far as the Americans and the Canadians in seeking to not just freeze but seize Russian assets so that we could state assets so that they can be used for the development of Ukraine? Why has the Abramovich money still not gone to Ukraine? Because that would be more than £3 billion, more than the amount that the UK has so far devoted. And finally, can you just say a word about Vladimir Kara-Murza? For a man many of us have met here, very, very brave. We want to make sure that the UK government is doing everything in its power to make sure that he is protected in Russia.
Secretary.
Mr. Speaker, the honourable gentleman's asked a number of questions, which some of which are very much in the remit of the Foreign Secretary. The Deputy Foreign Secretary will answer in this House on his behalf, but I can let him know that the answers that I have previously given to him and have been given from the Foreign Office will have remained unchanged. We, of course, work with our international partners because it has to be sanctions evasion, and the fight against sanctions evasion is by nature an international act. As I say, enforcement is predominantly a HMT competency, and the international cooperation falls very much within the remit of the FCDO. But of course, we all work to try and ensure that sanctions evasion does not happen. I'm going to have to correct him. A number of countries are investigating what a seizure and liquidation of Russian assets regime might look like. No country has seized and liquidated Russian assets. And as I say, so we will continue to work with our international partners to exploring ways of ensuring that the people who've paid for the brutality paid for the regime. But to say that other countries have done this is not accurate.
Very sure.
Mr. Speaker, can I say what a pleasure it is that we're taking this seriously? And the words of the Home Secretary filled me with renewed optimism, because I think we need both optimism and action. And does he agree with me that we can never underrate the Russians and Vladimir Putin? The fact of the matter is they are very clever. And they are using strategies, whether they're financial or whether they're using people, dupes in Europe and other places to channel their influence. We have to be wary at every level. Does he think that our intelligence services are equipped to cope with the real challenge that we now have from Russia and indeed from China? And has he picking up what I'm picking up from a lot of my old friends in Washington, that they're not only very disturbed about Russian influence on American elections. I have heard very strong information that they believe that some of the influence coming from Russia via London and from the United Kingdom, and that is a real problem. And can we make sure, and he knows I've got this to be in my bonnet, there are people in this Parliament have been named as very close to Russia. We have a member of the House of Lords featured in a main article in the Times only 2 weeks ago. A member of the House of Lords. Surely we must make our House and our Parliament as clean and as above board as absolutely possible. And if there are groups or individuals in this place, we should know about it.
I presume there was a question.
Mr. Speaker, the honourable gentleman speaks with great knowledge and passion about these incredibly important issues. He will, of course, understand that I will not go into detail about intelligence and security matters, but I can reassure him and I can reassure the House that both our intelligence services, the external-facing services, and our security services are incredibly effective, are without doubt amongst the best in the world, and I would perhaps rather arrogantly suggest are the best in the world. Both in my experience as Home Secretary and my former role as Foreign Secretary, I have seen the positive diplomatic influence that our agencies bring on our behalf. They are regarded very, very highly by our allies and international partners. And so, without going into detail, I hope that he and the House can feel reassured that we are in good hands. However, of course, we have to recognise that, just as the Honourable Gentleman has said, Russia takes pride in its long history of disinformation and propaganda and compromat. They wear it as a badge of honour. They are constantly evolving their threat towards us, so we have to constantly evolve our defences. I can reassure him that we are doing that. The National Security Act is part of that, but we reserve the right to take further action if Russia were to be foolish enough to escalate or attempt, once again, the actions that we believe they have taken in our country.
Castle.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Neither prosecutions nor penalties have been applied to those who are importing Russian oil refined in and branded as Indian or other countries. And yet, at the same time, the threat of closure hangs over Grangemouth refinery. The world knows that this is ongoing. Grangemouth is aware of the threat that faces them in industrialisation in Scotland. Is it not time that the Minister spoke to colleagues to ensure that not just state security but energy security is considered and that a refinery capacity remains in Scotland, and at the same time that those who are profiting from bringing in Russian oil should in fact be prosecuted?
Home Secretary.
Mr. Speaker, this government is completely committed to ensuring energy security. Whilst it has not been universally applauded, the licences that we have awarded to ensure that there is a vibrant hydrocarbons industry in Scotland is important. It's important for jobs, it's important for the Scottish economy, it's important for the UK economy, and it is important for energy security. So I can reassure him and the House that energy security will remain at the forefront of our minds. He makes the point about conversation about sanctions evasion, particularly about oil and gas sanctions evasion. I can assure him that my Right Honourable Noble friend Lord Cameron and I, when I was Foreign Secretary, raised these issues internationally with those countries still trading with Russia at every opportunity.
Jim Shannon.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I very much thank the Secretary of State for his statement and welcome his clear commitment. Encourages all in this House and across this great nation whenever the Secretary of State comes to make his commitment. Bearing in mind the overnight raid on Ukraine's energy facilities and the continued aggression carried out when our eyes are turned very much to the Middle East, does the Secretary of State not believe that we must send a very swift, strong message to Putin that we are approaching the point where decisive action must be taken by the Allies, and that we have both capacity and the will to intervene against the despicable war being waged and carried against the Ukrainian people? Thank you.
Mr. Speaker, the Honourable Gentleman raises an important point I want to reinforce. It was quite clear that Vladimir Putin thought that the UK and our wider allies would be either distracted or dissuaded from supporting Ukraine when he initiated his full-scale invasion. Nothing could have been further from the truth. And if he thought that the evolving situation in Gaza, the terrorist attack against Israel and their military actions to defend themselves would again distract us from our support to Ukraine or our self-defence against Russian malign activity, again, he would be mistaken. So I can reassure the Honourable Gentleman in the House that whilst, of course, we are very focused on the situation in Gaza and southwest Israel and the wider Middle East region, we are not going to lose sight of our commitment to the Ukrainians in their self-defence and to re-establish the fact that you cannot redraw national borders by force.
That completes the statement, so let the front bench clear.